Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second day of Industry City. It's a place where we explore how the mobile ecosystem connects or integrates with the various key verticals. Today is FinTech vertical. My name is Brian Gorman. I'm the FinTech vertical lead at the GSMA. So delighted to see you all today. Thanks very much for taking the time out to join us. In this specific session, we're going to look at fighting back against financial crime. And I need to recognize at this point the great contribution of our sponsors, JP Morgan, and our supportive sponsors, WellPay, without whom we would never be able to kind of create a session like this. By way of an introduction to FinTech at GSMA and what we do, it's really about collaboration. What we're trying to do is bring our partners together to encourage collaboration right across the ecosystem. We do that in two ways. We have our own digital forum that runs 4 times a year. We bring people together and we share insights and case studies. Then we have a quite extensive outreach program and event program, as you can see from being here today, where we have more of an opportunity to go into those case studies in detail. And of course, it also helps and encourages networking. So we were perhaps the latest vertical set up at the GSMA about 12 months ago, and you can see on screen some of the partners that we worked with in the first year who brought their case studies and insights and shared them with our community. It worked really well being here last year. It was a bit of an experiment. FinTech worked really well. It was relatively new. And then around the world, we found great interest from our partners across the world. So we went to support events in Singapore, in Africa, and also America. So FinTech is the newest vertical, but it's been really well received by our partners, and there's lots of support, as you'll see. So this is the shape of today. I'm delighted to say that we've got 20 experienced senior executives with us today. That includes one M&O CEO, 4 FinTech CEOs, a whole range of other senior executives and experienced speakers who'll share their insights and thought with us throughout the day. So you can see the various times. We're just starting on the first one now, but we've got quite a busy day ahead of us, and we're really pleased with the lineup of speakers we've got to come and share their thoughts today. And so, to the first session, the clock's ticking and we need to get started. So I'd like to welcome on stage at this point my colleagues who are going to explore financial crime with me. I'd like to welcome Fraser King, Teresa Walsh, Jason Georgi, Pilar Clavería, and Alexander Baines. If you could come and join me on stage, please. Thank you. So what we're trying to do in the session today is explore key trends that we're seeing in financial crime, and then we're going to explore some of the solutions that the team are actually delivering to help fight back. As you know, it's quite a sensitive area. The team can only really talk about things in the public domain, so it may be that one of their answers to one of my questions is a little bit guarded, but I'm sure you'll appreciate that just the way it needs to be, really. So, but we're looking forward to the session very much. Thanks very much for joining us, guys. What I wanted to really do is just give you kind of a 60-second intro, if I can, to yourself and the business. Perhaps, Alex, if I start with you and work through the team.
Yeah, so my name is Alexander Baines. I work for First Orion. I don't know how many of you will be aware. If you're in the telco space, you've probably heard of us. And we provide the call protection solutions, so anti-fraud solutions for carriers, and then branded calling solutions for enterprises.
Super, thanks, Alex. Pilar?
Hello, my name is Pilar Clavería. I work at the Spanish Banking Association, which is the trade association for Spanish banks. I'm a specialist in payments, but also in charge of cybersecurity matters.
Super, thank you, Pilar. Jason?
I'm Jason Georgi, one of the field CTOs for Palo Networks. My focus is in secure access service edge, zero trust network access, and things like that.
Super, thanks, Jason. Teresa?
I'm Teresa Walsh. I'm the Global Head of Intelligence for FS-ISAC, which is a membership consortium of financial institutions like banks and insurance companies, and we talk about cyber risks and resilience.
Super, thanks. Fraser?
Fraser King from Vodafone Business. I head up commercial strategy and business development for our identity API portfolio globally. And in the context of today, I'll be sharing some of our experiences and reflections on the work we've been doing within banking and financial services to help fight financial crime.
Thanks, Fraser. Thanks all for the intro. So we've got a very broad panel right across the ecosystem, really, and that's deliberate to get different perspectives. So in the first part of our time today, we're going to explore key trends. So Jason, if I can come to you first, from your perspective at Palo Alto, what's one of the key trends you see in fraud and financial crime?
The biggest thing, and it's not even just specific to FinTech, but it's also industry-wide, the attempt to gain unauthorized access to systems, usually through credential theft or abuse, right? And so this is becoming a big trend that everybody's trying to get their hands around. What we're seeing less and less of is kind of that brute force into data center type systems and things like that, and saying, if I'm an attacker, what's the path of least resistance? Just like swiping a badge to enter a building, right? If I gain access to credentials, I get access to a whole lot of privileged information and systems.
Right.
So that, and then data exfiltration, sensitive data exfiltration.
And those credentials are being found how? How is that?
Typically spear phishing campaigns, or just attempted access to certain malicious sites that are meant to trap those and grab those and then use them. There's advanced spoofing techniques out there now to where even if you use things like device posturing around location and time of day, the right spoofing techniques can easily bypass a lot of that. So now we're getting into a point where if our world is becoming identity-centric when it comes to accessing certain applications and systems, what happens when that identity is compromised?
Right.
So that's what we're really trying to get strategic about with a lot of our customers, is you got to think a little bit bigger. What does defense in depth now look like?
Okay.
And couple all of this with the fact that work is an activity, it's not a place now. And so a lot of the former physical guardrails we may have as far as badging into an office, authenticating to a network, those are gone when so many employees are working at home.
Okay, yes, of course, yeah. It sounded like that as a really standout problem. It sounded like that was sort of like the 80-20 rule, that's 80% of the problem.
Yeah.
Is that?
Absolutely.
Right, okay, super, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Teresa, can I come from FS-ISAC's perspective? What do you see?
Yeah, well, I mean, touching on the topic of expanding your horizon and expanding your thinking, that's definitely what we're seeing. We're always a cyber risk-oriented organization, but what we're seeing with financial crime specifically is that the cyber world and the financial crime worlds are getting smaller, basically, and it's because the bad guys are using technology against us. And we have to actually get our cybersecurity leaders as part of that anti-fraud solution. You do see a lot more CISOs these days, Chief Information Security Officers, who now have some sort of fraud remit.
Yeah.
And for the first time, they have to get into this anti-fraud game and are wondering what to do and how to do this. And so, but we do see that in the threats that we're dealing with as well, is that a lot of these cyber-enabled threats, when it comes to fraud or different types of economic crime, they are relying on cyber tools. And even if you just walk around this entire very innovative area, the first thing that comes to mind is how many times a fraudster might be able to use some of these newer apps and newer technologies against us. And I think that's where we do see the artificial intelligence and ChatGPT. It's going to become much harder for the banks to detect fraudulent identities. And it is going to be much more on us to try to figure out how to combat that, because now with ChatGPT especially, the barriers to entry into fraud are so much lower.
Yep. Do you see, is there any regional trends in the insights that you see? Does it differ in different parts of the world?
It is different. I mean, there are different regulations, of course. In the EU, there tends to be a little bit more harmonization about what different countries are doing when it comes to fighting financial crime, but you don't find that across the world. I mean, you do have now efforts to say, how can we harmonize this a little bit better to fight against money laundering, to fight against human trafficking, things that do come to mind. Ransomware is probably a very good example of how the international community did get together, because you do have a lot of different operators behind ransomware, including nation states. And so it's something that we do have to discuss as an international community as well.
Yeah, super, thank you. That's a good background. Alex, if I can come to you, from a perspective of the work that you do, trying to fight off malicious calls, what are the kind of key trends that you see?
So, we publish several reports for different industries that track all the trends that are happening, so you can see those on our website. But specific to financial services, we've seen them change on a regular basis. So, in general, scam calls are rising. In 2021, there was a 100% increase year on year, and in 2022, another 70% increase in scam calls generally. And to give you a figure, that represents about 40 billion scam calls a year we detected last year. And that's from our in-network solutions, so that's real data. And it's not just the traditional ones, so it's not just, oh, it's your bank calling, I'm representing your bank and I want your credit card details. It's much more sophisticated, and I was talking to Teresa about this earlier. They're really using a variety of data sources to build profiles on people and target them. But with regard to sort of the latest trends, I had my data team bring up what we're seeing in the last 3 to 6 months, and it kind of shows that they're keeping in touch with what's going on in the world right now. And our sort of top 3 trends at the moment are credit relief, which, obviously with the economic outlook, that's kind of natural, right? Debt settlement, so they're pushing people to agree to really good terms on settling their debt by doing it over the phone then, and setting a time limit to that, so convincing them to, hand over their sensitive information over the phone then to get a good deal effectively. And then the third one is suspicious transactions. And, people obviously panic when they're made aware that there might be a suspicious transaction on their account, and are more likely to provide authentication information about themselves. So those are sort of the 3 major trends right now, but scammers evolve all the time, so we see different frauds emerge on a weekly basis, and obviously have to react to those threats.
It sounds like the first 2 are very much linked into, I don't know, what's going on in society at that point in time.
Yeah.
Is that presumably the pandemic? You must have seen that during.
Well, that's the thing, right? So if you asked me this same question in 2020, then I could give you a whole list of other fraud cases. But yeah, it's definitely what's happening at the time, and we have to remember that this industry, from the fraudsters' perspective, right, illicit industry, is huge money. So these guys invest a lot of time in preparing how they're going to stage their fraud. And we capture a lot of that, and we have transcripts that we see from scammers approaching people and looking at small pieces of information, like if they're calling from the bank, they might mention, oh, I'm from the bank in this location in this area, and you immediately trust that more because you think, well, that's the bank I normally withdraw cash from, for example, right?
Right. Okay. So we're gonna dive into solutions later, because I'm sure, like you, I'm really keen to know how it all works, in terms of what it can tell us anyway. But we'll see that a bit later. Pilar, can I come from you? Thanks very much for joining us. Delighted you're here. As your representation of the Spanish banks, what's the thing that concerning them?
Oh, I think what is concerning Spanish banks is not so different of other places, but what it is concerning them more now is that behavior, which is more and more frequent all around. It is the very old behaviors of criminals, but within the new digital world. So what makes the big difference is the scale, is the amount of attacks.
Right.
Even if a few of them only succeed, it is quite a number. And there is possibility to get, always to get money, to monetize this crime with very little effort. And this is also due to the behavior of the people. They are in this digital world that they trust too much. I know they trust the banks because they have a very secure place, which is true, but only within their perimeter. They cannot control, banks cannot control what happens outside that perimeter, and people are very confident because they are used to safe relationship with the banks. They may not be so careful when they go to the other side of the cyber world. And that is something that worries the sector, because people are leaving digital footprint all around without being conscious of how much information they are leaving behind that can be used, as you said, to organize information and to target attacks to specific people. They don't need to be VIP people. They just current people like each one of us. We can all be a target for those criminals. And considering the amount of information that we leave within the networks or in non-secure places because they ask to sign up, and we leave all the information very happy to get something back, and that can be used for the good or unfortunately also for the bad. So it's always the same behaviors. And then with all that information, they get enough knowledge of the victim, so to pretend to be something they have to trust when they have even a conversation or a chat or an email or whatever kind of communication. They provide enough information for the victim to pretend to be someone else, and they play with the emotions of the victim. So in the end, the victim provides much more information even than the one they had without realizing it, and that is enough for them to be scammed in the end. So that is what worries more the sector, because even if we put all the security within the systems, we cannot control what happens outside. The most common cases that we see now is the combination of all those scams or vectors, which are this mission together with a phone call, pretending to be either the bank or telephone company or whoever. They have enough information to make you trust they are what they pretend to be, and that is very risky. So we need to be careful and be aware of the threats, the things that can happen. It's not that we have to be scared all the time, but we just to be conscious.
Thank you. Thanks, Pilar. So a major problem for the Spanish banks, and I know, Fraser, obviously you work very closely with the UK banks. Perhaps you could share your perspective on the major trends that we see.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the scale of the problem is only getting bigger. I think it's the World Economic Forum that estimates if financial crime as a country would be the third largest economy in the world, right? So we're dealing with very sophisticated, very well-funded, very well-resourced organizations who are not operating in the same sphere that banks and telcos. You know, these people are able to move very quickly. They don't need business cases, they don't need process, they don't need to worry about regulation. So the adversary is moving very, very quickly. The problem is getting bigger. The United Kingdom, the UK Finance, they publish a report every year about the distribution of losses inside of banking. And although fraud and financial crime touches pretty much every industry, insurance, banking, finance, social networks, fraudsters are ultimately after the money. The money is in the bank account, right? So the banks are ultimately the end target for all of these attacks. The UK Finance report, as my colleagues have pointed out, about 80% of the losses now inside of banking can be attributed back to social engineering attacks. Fraudsters have, as banks and other organizations have got very, very good at defending their networks, their businesses, introduction of biometrics and so forth, fraudsters have moved to far less sophisticated attacks, which is just convincing someone to either disclose information about themselves that the fraudster can use to compromise their account, blackmail them, or take additional personal data, or convince that person to transfer money directly to the fraudster, be it an investment scam, a romance scam. You get a phone call, hi, it's the police here, your account is being attacked, you need to move the money across, right? So the majority of the losses we're seeing now all come back to social engineering. The challenge the banks face is the person making the transaction is often the genuine consumer. The biometric matches, they know the password, they know all the secret questions, and often even though the bank will ask and try and stop these transactions taking place, these consumers have been so well engineered or convinced that even the bank is in on this problem that these transactions go ahead. And in many cases, people are losing their entire life savings. I mean, this is a kind of a pandemic, I think, of the kind of the digital age. So the big conversation that we have in banking and financial services is how can we help banks develop better defenses against social engineering attacks? And I think social engineering attacks have been around for the entirety of the internet. You can go back 10 years, the Nigerian prince scam, right? I'm a Nigerian prince, I've got money. The difference now, as Maria pointed out, the fraudster, we leave so many digital footprints around. The fraudster has so much information about us, and they're coming through to our mobile phone often in the morning at a time where we're in a hurry, right? And it's that immediacy and that sort of velocity of that conversation taking place. And they've become very, very sophisticated. It's not just ringing people randomly. By the time they contact you as a victim, they may have had a number of additional steps that have taken place in the lead up to be able to convince you, right? So we've moved from a sort of a broad sort of phishing attempt into a far more what you would consider to be a sort of a spearfish or a kind of a whalefish attempt. So social engineering, that for us is the big problem that financial crime is facing.
Super, thank you. So we call the session Fighting Back. So I think we've established we have got indeed a major problem on our hands. We're dealing with some extremely smart people. And so now in the second part of this session, we really want to explore the solutions my colleagues are driving to try and help us fight back. So Jason, if I can come for you first. No, big headline. Can you explain to us what's Palo Alto doing to try and help fight back against these challenges we see?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And this is important, and it's important for several reasons, because every organization that I talk to that's trying to stop that unauthorized access to certain systems, right, is looking at a program around, the industry term, we'll call it zero trust. Zero trust networking, network access is a way to enable zero trust principles and strategies. But what I continue to see is a lot of organizations thinking that when they hear the term ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access, it means the same thing, no matter who they're going to acquire that type of technology from. And the reality is, most of the organizations that provide these security services look at this from an access perspective. Think of WhatsApp. You open up WhatsApp, you start a chat, what does it say? End-to-end encryption, right? So what these solutions have is an endpoint client and an app publisher that builds a tunnel between the two, and that's really it. There's nothing happening man-in-the-middle-wise to say what's happening within that session. So there's a period of zero trust as far as not allowing unauthorized access to a system, but once that access is allowed, what are you doing to stop something malicious from happening?
Right.
And so our approach at Palo is to say, we can do better than just provide secure access. It is providing security within the access itself. So it's along the principle of never trust, always verify that says, if you're looking at zero trust as a strategy, zero trust network access from an implementation of a supporting mechanism, what are the outcomes you're actually trying to achieve? So if that starts with something like provide least privileged access to a system, is least privileged access really one user to one application? Or what level of attribution of that application? Read-only access, upload only, download only, right? And so that's truly least privilege, the minimum amount you need to do your job.
Yeah.
And then you can expand that into things like continuous trust verification. Once that session is established, am I making sure that if anything does change, I'm accessing something from home, particular system, all of a sudden an iOS device is seeing Jason try to access another system from the UK, probably not right? So what are we doing about that? And then security inspection. This is the big one. Providing access securely is one thing, but you have to be able to look at what's happening within that session. Because otherwise, if credentials are abused or stolen, and abuse is a big one, insider threat is humongous.
Right.
If I have highly privileged access to a system that I'm now trying to take down, what's going to stop me from packaging up malware into a PDF and uploading it to a host that other people are going to start pulling down? Yeah. Or what's going to stop me from exfiltrating data from a host or a service that I have downloadability to, right? So it's not just providing the access, but then providing secure access around it. And that's what we're doing, is taking that broader approach to say, what are the outcomes that zero trust network access really needs to solve for your organization? Don't get wrapped up in the terminology. What is the outcome you need to solve? And now let's go solve those outcomes. So that's really the approach that we're trying to take.
Yeah, no, that was a really good explanation, thank you. So where are we on that journey? Are you dealing with lots of corporate clients? Are we kind of like 3% of the way in, 23% of the way of getting everyone to use it? Where are we on that journey?
I would say every organization I talk to is at least throwing the terminology out there. So we've got 100% of mind share.
Yeah.
Application-wise, like a full zero trust implementation, 0, maybe 1%. It's hard. This is not easy.
No, I can imagine.
And it's got to be, you start small. What are some of the critical things you need to do? But everyone is in some part of this journey when they have critical assets to protect, whether that's intellectual property, whether it's PII or PCI information. It doesn't matter. Everybody's trying to figure it out. So people are going down the path now. for a long time, we were trying to convince people, like, you need to start thinking about this.
Yes.
Now it's like, I'm thinking about this, how can you help? And that's really refreshing, because now it's more like, okay, you're ready to come along for this ride with us.
Yeah.
Let's help you get there.
Yeah.
So that is definitely improving over time. And one of the key things I do see is a more serious approach to it. It's not just like, well, hey, I'm going to go buy a solution that says I can have zero trust now. It's more like, I know I need to start with organizational change management. Terminology of zero trust is really tough in a lot of organizations. You say, go to your board of directors or executive team, oh, I want to implement zero trust. Wait, you don't trust us? What is this, right? So call it what you want. Adaptive access, risk-based access, whatever you want. Us in the industry, we know what we're talking about, but make it more friendly to that organization too. Start to get over those political hurdles so that the technology can actually do its job.
Yeah, that's super. Thank you. That's
sure.
really helpful. Thank you. Teresa, obviously at the heart of FS-ISAC is global collaboration. So how does that work in practice? If there was a denial of service attack on a bank in Pakistan, for example, how would that information get shared around the community to try and make sure they can defend themselves from that?
Yeah, so we offer a lot of different platforms for the banks and insurance companies or whatever other types of financial services to talk about what they're seeing, because the whole concept of what we're doing is that you're not alone. You're not the only one seeing it. Somebody else out there has seen it, unless you've done something to really, really make a cyber attacker or fraudster unhappy. They're likely targeting many, many more banks than just you. So, everybody always talks about the shortage of talent.
Yeah.
This is a way to kind of get around that, because you're crowdsourcing the information with each other. And, if you're a bank in Japan, a bank in Brazil might have seen the exact same thing that you're seeing. And so that's the concept of mutual defense. And what happens with one company, it becomes the lesson learned and the defense for everybody else. And so then you can, as a community, think about how to disrupt that.
Yeah. So is it literally a Teams folder and they upload insights on what they've seen in their country so people can explore what that might mean if it hit them? Is that how it works?
It's the full range of intelligence, so I won't go into the intelligence cycle. But you could go all the way down to just like the simple indicators that you kind of say, I saw this phone number, come out to us. And, in the past it was much easier. Alexander was mentioning that before, that in the past they used to use one number to make all their calls, and now they're innovating and they're and now sometimes the indicators are good and you can still use them, but you need to also talk about behavior. What is the behavior that you're seeing that the fraudster or the criminal is doing against you? And that behavior might be something that somebody else is seeing, and being able to compare those notes. And it could even just be as simple as somebody saying, I'm seeing something weird. Is anybody else seeing this? And then suddenly you have 5 other banks around the world who all raise their hands and say, yeah, we're seeing that exact same behavior too.
And so do new, I'll ask, I'll see if you can answer it, I'm not sure, but do new attack vectors tend to spin up in certain parts of the world?
Well, it goes in phases. I think we do see sometimes all of a sudden there will be a spike somewhere. So, like SS7 or something like that, that suddenly there's a spike in one country, and then 6 months later there's a spike in another country.
Right.
But we can try to connect the dots at that point to say, when it happened in the UK, for instance, Austria had already done that a year before. So we were able to link the UK banks with the Austrian banks to get that lessons learned. And so it's one of those concepts that it might not all be happening at the same time, but it probably did happen somewhere, sometime.
Yeah.
And so you can at least help each other get through the situation you're facing.
That's super, thank you. So Alex, I can come to you then. So I think 3 billion calls a month being blocked, hitting the network. So tell me more about how these solutions kind of work to protect consumers.
Yeah, so we have our solutions deployed in a variety of networks at the moment, and we detect in real time using a variety of ways, but mainly looking at the data. We have machine learning algorithms that will detect these calls in real time, then tag them, and then depending on which network we're talking about that we work with, we often give the consumer the choice then, so we will tag it with a particular phrase that will alert the user to know that maybe not to trust that call as much as they normally would, but they ultimately will get the decision whether to answer it. And we hand that to the user, so the consumer can make that decision themselves. But really, we started with all of that about 14 years ago when we were founded, that's really where we were going, was trying to mitigate scam fraud calls mainly for voice and telcos. And we've kind of transitioned now to helping enterprises, because whilst we're stopping scam calls and protecting consumers, there is an element of the legitimate businesses don't have many forms of communication with their customers that are fully secure. So we're trying to promote trust in voice, and part of that is our branded calling solutions that we launched in the last 2 years. We give businesses the ability to brand all of their outbound phone calls to their customers and deliver an authenticated call, which, at least from that perspective, the customer will be able to know this is my bank that's calling and have 100% confidence in taking that call. Obviously, with all of our learnings from our fraud solution in mind, we obviously have spoof-proof elements to it, and we give the brand the ability to not only say, oh, it's this bank calling, but to also deliver a custom message with the call and the logo and graphic element as well. So yeah, and at the moment with that particular solution, I would say about 50% of our current onboardings are banks. So this is something that's growing in the finance industry. And that's insurance, banking, anything where they're handling sensitive information is really where we're seeing the most growth. But you can imagine that it's across the board, right? Booking.com, Airbnb, these kind of companies are the ones that, from a travel perspective, there's been plenty of fraud in that sector. So we're speaking to small travel companies from all sizes, SMEs right up to global businesses that are now delivering fraud-proof, enhanced, branded phone calls.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's really where we're at the moment. We've hit certain milestones. We're delivering more than 100 million of these calls a month at the moment. And we expect that to rise into the billions over the next 24 months. So yeah, we have some network partners in some countries. And then also we have an over-the-top solution, which is a mobile SDK that banks, for example, that have very high distribution of their mobile app, they can deliver those calls over the top. So yeah, I mean, if anyone's interested in learning more, we got a booth in Hall 5, and you can learn more about it.
To help with this, if you on the consumer side, if you know it's a call that looks suspect, can you block that call? Is the proposition you can block some but others you can't block? How does that work in practice?
Yeah, that really depends on which deployment we're talking about. But yeah, there is sometimes a companion app we provide with the telco, and that will allow them to the consumer to decide what type of calls they want to receive, which ones they want to go direct to voicemail, that kind of thing.
Okay, super. Thank you. That's great.
No problem.
Thank you. Pilar, can we talk about the work in Spain? So what's the work going on in Spain to try and fight back?
Okay, individually banks do a lot to fight cybercrime, but this global world, digital world is not enough to fight on its own. They have a lot of intelligence in their systems to detect whether it is the customer behind or not, but that is not enough. They may provide alerts like the big tech provides, saying, you have switched on with a new device, is it really you, and things like that. But as I said, this is not enough, so we have not a very long tradition on cooperation on these matters, but within the short period we have been working together. We have first understood the problems, prioritized them, and now we have recently launched an awareness campaign in order to make people aware of the risk on of how to behave in this digital world. It was a very large campaign that reached around 65% of the audience. On TV, only 25 million, plus something else on radio, and 1.5 million also in social networks, so it was really, really quite interesting. We also participate on international campaigns led by Europol, and with all the enforcement agents, they regularly launch those campaigns for specific scams that are more in fashion than others, and we cooperate with them. And we are now building, also starting to approach cooperation with the mobile operators that we think has to happen beside the commercial relationship of daily business. We really need to work with specialized people leading with cybercrime, because as you know, it's not only the banks, but also the devices and the networks and so on and so on. So we really need to cooperate. And we are also working on regulation. We know regulation is not enough to stop criminals, but that may help the industry to defend themselves and to work together. We are trying to find where there are stoppers on the legislative, diverse in sectorial regulations, and we pretend to work together to overlap them, I mean, to correct them, so we can really work together in this fight.
Super, thanks, Pilar. So, again, Spanish banks collaboration. Fraser, do you want to talk about the work you're doing to collaborate in the UK and fight social engineering fraud?
Yeah, I think collaboration is the solution. There's three things actually you need. You need collaboration, you need ultimate trust between the parties collaborating, and then you need evidence to be able to support any decision that you're making. For the last 3 years, we have been opening up access to our mobile networks predominantly within financial service, so particularly giving banking the ability to reach into the mobile network, look at certain signals and data points that can be correlated with fraud. So we have a very good collaboration. We have deep relationships with the banks, particularly in the UK. And what that actually enabled us to do is, through that collaboration, when the bank said social engineering is the problem, are there any signals in the mobile network that could be correlated and be used to help us feed those signals into our risk engine as a bank to fight this problem? What exists? And it was an interesting discussion because initially, because the problem is so big, the banks lack empirical evidence of how these attacks take place, right? Because if you're the victim and the bank speaks to you, the bank gets the victim's perspective of what happens, right? So the first thing we recognized, there was a complete absence of any real evidence of how these attacks were taking place in some cases. What we were able to do in the UK is we were able to convince 3 of the major banks in the UK to hand us the records of customers who'd been the victims of a social engineering attack over a 3-month period. That was about 100,000 records. We took those 100,000 records, we identified the Vodafone customers that existed in that group. We built a machine learning model that was looking for signals in the network in the lead up to the attack taking place, and at the moment the attack taking place that were correlated with that fraud happening. We were able to identify about 16 different data points that were clearly correlated with it. On the collaboration front as well, the work we do is not just Vodafone, it's actually the entire mobile community working together, and obviously GSMA is a key proponent in bringing the mobile operators together. So we were then able to kind of share the results from the work with the other mobile operators in that country, share them back with the banks. And then the next question was, well, could you actually build this into a prototype or a proof of concept, right? These services didn't exist. So we've got a great product development team inside of Vodafone. We were able to then build a proof of concept within about 3 months, which anyone who works in telco or banking will know that's absolutely lightning pace. And then we were then able to kind of run that as a real-time pilot. So the bank was then, every time the bank thought, or the bank system identified a potential social engineering taking place, they would kind of reach out to this API. This API would return with certain data points, given the sensitivity of what we're talking about. We can't go into the detail. And then they would feed that into their risk engine, and that would then be used to determine whether or not this could or could not be social engineering. If it was social engineering, they might block that transaction and then work forward to triage it. The results from the proof of concept were phenomenal. We identified the potential of a 20 to 25% reduction in social engineering attacks overall, which was massive. In some cases, we were able to identify up to about 85% of these attacks taking place. So there's a really interesting opportunity because all of these attacks are ultimately mobile-centric, not all of them, right? But a large majority of them are kind of mobile-centric. If you can open up access to the mobile network and you can share those signals in real time with the banks and with other vendors inside of the bank's ecosystem, and you can do that collectively across the industry, you can have a material impact on this kind of problem area. So yeah, super exciting place to be involved in. Highly complex. It's a minefield of regulation and the kind of the rules that exist. But being able to work collaboratively, high trust environments, being able to kind of share data and information and make sure you've got the right smart people in the room talking to each other. That's really the core of the work that we've been doing.
Super, thanks. So we're virtually out of time. I've just got a couple of slides to show in closing, so if I can ask my colleagues just to stay seated for one moment. What we're trying to do with Industry City is share some insights, but also we have our networking area just across the way, and our guests will be available for any more questions, so by all means do catch them. They could only give you a real flavour for what they do today, but I think we've established it's a major problem, but I was encouraged by some of the solutions the team talked about. I think there's some really good work going on, so they will be available for more questions and discussions across the way. So just in closing, if I may, this is the structure of the rest of the day. Our next session is in 15 minutes time, so do stay with us if you can for that. And then very final slide, as I said at the beginning, FinTech is a real theme at GSMA now. We've been asked by our partners to facilitate the exploration of this area in more detail. And our next session is the FinTech Forum at the end of March. So if you are a GSMA member, you're most entitled to come along and join that session. So if I could ask you to show your appreciation for the panel, please. And we'll see you shortly. Thank you.